Hey, hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jesse, and today we are doing a reading wrap-up for the month of February. A very casual, in-bed reading wrap-up. I'm not currently home, I'm currently in New York for a few weeks, and so I'm just working with what I've got here, and that just so happens to be a little bed situation. So we're filming in bed today, and I don't have a majority of the books that I read in February physically here with me. One, because I got a lot of the books that I read in the month of February from the library, and also because, obviously, I'm not home, and so I don't have a lot of the books that I read, so I will be just like utilizing images of the books. I hope that's okay. I hope that works. I read a total of 11 books in the month of February, and honestly, it was a rather mixed bag in terms of reading for me. I read a few books that I really enjoyed, and a lot of books that I really didn't enjoy, and a lot of the books that I read in February were a part of reading vlogs. So throughout the video, I will mention the vlogs that some of these books showed up in. Let's get into it. The first book that I read in February is The Witch's Hand. This is a part of the Montague Twins duology. This is a graphic novel duology, and in it we are following magical twin detectives, Pete and Alistair, who in their free time are taking on mysteries alongside their not blood-related sister. Throughout the first graphic novel, we are following them as they are trying to uncover the truth behind what happened to these girls that cast a spell and then disappeared. This is one of those moments where I randomly came across a book at the library, picked it up, took it home with me, and struck gold, like full-on struck gold. I loved this graphic novel, and I'm super excited to get to volume 2. I was hoping to get around to volume 2 in the month of February, but it just didn't work out for me. I honestly had a rather busy month, so I'm proud of the fact that I even got around to 11 books this month. But this graphic novel was so good. I loved all the characters throughout it. I feel like this graphic novel really delves deep into the characters. There is a plot happening, but I just feel like the character aspect of it really stood out to me the most. It has top tier characters that give you the feely wheelies. One of the characters throughout the book is coming out to those he's closest to, and it just furthers the bond of those he confides in. The brotherly bond is explosive in this book. I love a strong sibling bond in a book. And also the character that they consider basically a sister is a really great addition and just really shapes out this amazing trio. The dialogue was brilliant and the comedic timing was everything. It had me audibly laughing throughout it, and it was just all around a good time. The only negative thing that I can think to talk about with this book is the magic element. It just feels a little bit on the info dumpy side, and I just wish it was incorporated in a way where it didn't spend like 10 pages explaining all the magical bits. It definitely slogged and clogged the pacing real bad. Outside of that though, a new favorite. I'm super excited to get to the second volume, and I honestly wish it was expanded into a series. I know that I'm the worst at series. I know that I have commitment issues when it comes to series, but like, I just loved it so much, and I just wish it was expanded. I want more. Give me more. It's one of those books too that has like a nostalgic quality to it. I feel like it's reminiscent of the Hardy Boys, Scooby-Doo, Nancy Drew, Supernatural a little bit. If all of those came together and birthed a baby into the world, that's kind of the vibe this book has. I ended up giving The Witch's Hand a 4 out of 5 stars. For the next 3 books, they were a part of my reading vlog where I read your worst books of 2023. Next we have Dig. I feel sad talking about this book because I know that it's a well-loved book, but it just did not hit for me. It really didn't work for me, and it devastates me because I really wanted to like it. I really, really wanted to, but it just didn't hit for me. It didn't land for me. It didn't dig itself into my heart. It's sort of a hard book to describe, but in it we are following 5 teenagers, and all of their identities are being withheld. So they're given names like the Freak, the Shoveler, Can I Help You? And we follow all of their storylines as they're going through different things and exploring different challenges. Honestly, I don't want to give too much away because I feel like I would just like say all that there is to say about this book if I were to give you more details. Dig is truly one of those books that you yourself have to dig through in order to kind of understand it. I already did the digging, so if you want to know more, you've got to pick up your own shovel and do some digging. Here's the thing, it's one of those books where I could see the intent. I understood what the author like set out to do with this book. It was very clear to me. I didn't love the weird storytelling in exploring these topics that were brought up, and for me it just took way too long to get to the meat of the story for what was going on, that by the time it was like served on a platter, I had already filled up on the appetizer and wasn't interested in having more. I was filled to the brim, I had completely lost interest, and it just was lost on me. I did like the topics that were being explored, and I feel like the author did do a good job of like bringing up the topics and actually exploring them, not just bringing them up just to like have them a part of the story. Like, she actually did the work. She put everything in the blender, blended it up, and just like explored everything to a T. I will say that the ending was a bit of a banger. Like, the author clearly came through and was like bam, 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 but in the wise words of the underrated artist JoJo, it's just a little too late. Had it chopped the page count, peeled back on the confusion a bit, and gotten to the point, point, it would have had me in a chokehold, but I ended up giving Dig a 2 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Gilded by Marissa Meyer. In this book, we are following Cyrilda? Is that her name? I think it's Cyrilda. Cyrilda often tells these like out-of-pocket stories. Like you listen to her stories and you're like, girl, what? What even? And yet she like makes them sound so believable, even though more times than not, the stories that she's telling are false. They're not true. They're fictional tales. But the reason that she does this is because she's been cursed by the god of storytelling. So it's just a part of her at this point. It's second nature. And she just like can't help but tell these like outlandish stories. But soon enough, these outlandish stories end up sweeping her away into a village filled with darkness. Not a village, excuse me, like a kingdom filled with darkness. After the king hears the story that Cyrilda is able to spin straw into gold, he's like, well dang, you're gonna be spinning some straw into gold for me, and if you can't, you're donezo. If you couldn't tell, this is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and it's a good time. It's a fun time, and that's basically what I'm like narrowing it down to. I kind of went into it with that mindset. I didn't go into it thinking that it was going to change my life, but like overall, it was just like such a fun time. I enjoyed myself. Mind you, there are some bizarre happenings that go down in this book, like talk about out of pocket, talk about absurd, but it's also like fairly true to these story beats of Rumpelstiltskin. Like obviously it does its own thing and like carves its own path, but like there are some things that happen in the OG that show up in this retelling. And like sure, maybe it shouldn't be shocking, but like it was shocking. For me, this is my first time reading anything outside of the Lunar Chronicles series from Marissa Meyer. And I feel like she's at a point where she could write a fairy tale retelling in her sleep and somehow manage to make it a solid retelling. I will say I didn't feel as strongly about this as I did the Lunar Chronicles series, but I also feel like I'm just in such a different place with what I read now that this just didn't hit the same. One of my only complaints about this book is that I just had a hard time kind of buying into the darkness. Like Marissa Meyer's writing style is just so light and somewhat fluffy too at times that like when it came to like the darkness seeping through, I just like couldn't get a grasp on it because her writing style was too like light toned in my opinion. All around though, it was a good time. I had a fun time with it. Was it absurd at times? Yes. But if you're wanting an easy breezy good time, call 1-800-GILDED and you'll score a good time. I ended up giving Gilded a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Nothing But Blackened Teeth. This is a horror novella, and in it we are following a group of friends who take a trip and stay at this haunted mansion in Japan. The sort of lore behind the house is at one point there was going to be a wedding held at this house, and as the groom was heading to the home to get married, he ended up dying, and the bride was like, well, if I can't have them, then I'm not doing this dang thing anymore, and insist on she does in fact insist on being buried alive on the property. She hopes that in doing this, her husband's spirit will come back to her and they will be reunited through death. If that's not dedication to your man, I don't know what is. I mean, is she taking it too far? Oh honey, I can assure you she is taking it too far. No man is worth burying yourself alive for. Trust me on this. Raise your hand if you've ever been burned by an author you've loved in the past. Aggressively raising my hand. I'm gonna start with the positives, or positive. I don't have too many positives to say. I have one positive to say, and that is that I liked the writing style. I know that a lot of people said that it felt like the author was just like flexing that they knew a bunch of big words, but like there were parts of the writing style that I really enjoyed. I felt like the author did a good job of like kind of capturing an eerie, creepy tone. But outside of that, like everything was a mess. In particular, the characters, oh, they were frustrating to follow. And here's the thing, I love a good unlikable character. Like, I'm all for it, but I feel like you have to have good reasoning, solid backgrounds as to why the characters are so unlikable. And I felt like we didn't really get that with this book. They were just like terrible. And that just like made the reading experience miserable, because with unlikable characters, when you get that like background as to why they are the way that they are, you can kind of like excuse bad behavior or excuse their annoyingness, or kind of be like, okay, I understand why you're being this way. But because we didn't really have the time to like go back into these characters' past and like get to know why they are the way that they are, it just was like so frustrating. They were just so awful, and they were all awful to each other too. Like that on top of it, not good, not a good recipe. I also just did not enjoy the direction of the plot. I left it feeling like just rather unsatisfied, and I also just like couldn't help but roll my eyes. Listen, if you do want to pick up something by this author, please let it be The Salt Grows Heavy. I loved that novella. It's fantastic. Do not pick up this disaster of a book, okay? Don't do it. it. The more that I've sat with this book, I feel like I'd give it like a 1.5 out of 5 stars, but I think I initially gave it a 2-star rating. Next up, I was doing a reading party with my channel members, and I randomly decided to pick up this graphic novel called Lorna. I'd had it for a long time, and it was an interesting experience. It's a really short story about a girl named Lorna, obviously, and I'm gonna read this line directly off of Goodreads because I feel like it puts it just perfectly. Lorna is a young and socially awkward girl with no regard for human life. That's the best way to put this book, is that this character has no regard for human life. This is dark humor to a T. There were moments where I was like, should I be laughing at this? I should not be laughing at this, but I also can't help but laugh at it. It's not a book that's fully fleshed out. It's just like a short little novella graphic novel moment filled with murder. Casual murder. Like our main character will be like, I really like that girl's sunglasses. And then the next scene, you'll just like see a dead girl and you'll see our main character wearing the sunglasses. And Lorna feels like no remorse for the killings that she commits. She just goes about her days. Just another Monday for her. I think I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. I honestly would read another book about Lorna though, because I feel like she's just such a fascinating character. And I also did like the dark humor, so I'm gonna own up to that. The next 3 books were a part of the vlog where I read BookTuber's worst books of 2023. The first book that I read for that vlog is The Night House. In it we are following our main character Richard, who just has all these weird happenings surrounding him. He just keeps witnessing these strange things. It kicks off with a boy he's hanging out with being sucked through a phone. The disappearance of the boy is put on Richard's shoulders. And I mean, who's gonna believe Richard when he says, oh yeah, like the boy got sucked through the phone? Nobody. Imagine being questioned by the police and having to tell them that with a straight face, like, I watched a boy be sucked into a phone. This will be the first of a domino effect of weird things that Richard encounters. And he will do everything he can in order to find out the truth and clear his name. This was not for me in the slightest. The thing that it does really well is the weirdness. There were a lot of great like weird scenes, and I feel like had those been elaborated on, that I would have enjoyed this book a lot more. It had this moment where I felt like it might push itself into being like a Goosebumps moment but for adults, but it just didn't like fully move over into that lane, and I feel like I would have loved it honestly had it just like taken on being that, but instead it just like completely fell flat. I felt like it did more things wrong than it did right. I felt like it was a little bit outdated in terms of the text alone. The story structure I wasn't really a big fan of. The story is in a 3-part format, but part 1 takes up a majority of the book, leaving part 2 and part 3 with not enough time to kind of like flesh out an interesting story. And just the way that the events are broken down in part 1, it prevents the story from like moving forward in a solid way, because our main character is kind of like pulled away from the main event and a side character is left to like do all the work to like uncover the mystery, and it just really held the book back. So for the most part, I just could not get on board with this book. It was not for me. There were moments where I loved the weirdness, and the moments when like weird things were happening, I really loved how they were written, but overall I ended up landing on a 1.5 star rating with this book, I think, if I remember correctly, so not for me. I would like to try out more books by Joe Nesbo though, because I've heard really good things about his like mystery stories. This one was supposed to be more in the horror lane, though I don't know that it like fully pulled off being a horror book. So next I read Once More with a Feeling. In this book we are following Kathleen, who at one point was a mega pop star, but she ended up having a controversy and her career has been a bit on the quiet side. Now she's tackling a new path, and that involves Broadway. But the person who played a part in her pop stardom kind of falling apart is directing the show she's set to be a part of. Will she be able to set her feelings aside and reach for the stars, or will it have her spiraling into the past and trigger unresolved issues? I respect fanfiction, but I feel like there's good fanfiction and then there's like badly written fanfiction, and I feel like this book felt like badly written fanfiction. Not even badly written fanfiction, it felt like trashy fanfiction, respectfully. And listen, it was a fun time. I completed the book. I never at one point was like, oh, I feel the need to DNF this. Like, I was invested in it, but it definitely fell into a somewhat easy and addicting read. Just because it was addicting does not mean it was a good book. Trust me on that. It read like a YA romance, which would be fine if it was a YA romance, but it's not a YA romance. It's an adult romance. And that part was really frustrating. I feel like the characters themselves felt like YA characters, which is what made this book frustrating, because they should be acting like adults. Mind you, I know that they have a lot of trauma from their past and they're working through a lot of things. They've got a lot of issues, and I know that not every adult is going to be mature, but it just felt like it felt like high school characters. Like, that's what it felt like. Which, again, would have been fine if that's what I was signing up for. If this was a YA book, I probably would have let some things slide, but the main character was honestly really hard to follow because she's just like not that great of a person, and she's an even worse friend. Like, it's clear that she doesn't truly care about the people around her, and her true focus is only on herself. You also get to a point in the book where it's like, you know where it's going to go and how it's going to end, and you just like want to get to that part where it ends. I did like the parts where we delved into the past and kind of saw the characters when they were younger and what they had experienced and whatnot. Outside of that though, I wouldn't recommend it unless you want an unserious time with frustrating characters and a book that feels like trashy fanfiction. Respectfully. Next up, I read Finley Donovan Jumps the Gun, book 3 in the Finley Donovan book series, the series that honestly should have stayed one book, but for some reason is being dragged out to infinity and beyond. And yet I'm still here reading these books and committing to this series. Why do I do these things to myself? Why don't I commit to series that I actually enjoy? I have no excuses for this behavior. This story, or this series, initially starts out with a struggling author who is Finley, and she is just like trying to make ends meet. One day she has a meeting with her agent and she's discussing the plot of her book, and somebody overhears her discussing the book and mistakes her as a contracted killer, which ends up causing Finley to find herself wrapped up in a world of mystery and mayhem. This series has lost its initial charm and believability, and I feel like in this book in particular, you just like can't take it seriously. You're just like, this is so absurd and so over the top that it's just like not working anymore, and yet I can't stop reading it because like I love the writing style. It's just like such an easy read, and I do like sort of elements that come into play, some of like the thrillery elements, even though there's moments where it's just like, this could never ever 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 happen. How do all these insane and wild things keep happening to this person? I'm not saying that a book has to be believable in order to stay enjoyable. This one just falls into such an unhinged place that you just find yourself being like, be so for real right now. I gave Finley Donovan Jumps the Gun a 2 out of 5 stars. The last 3 books that I read were a part of my vlog where I read BookTuber's best books of 2023. First up, we have The 7-Year Slip. This book is basically what could go wrong when you fall in love with somebody who lives 7 years in the past. This is a heartwarming story that is filled with moments that will tug at your heartstrings, and it was just another banger for me with Ashley Poston. I can't praise this author enough. Like, I just really enjoy their books. Out of the 5 books I've read from them, they've only had 1 miss so far. So like, so far so good. They've got a nice track record going with me. We have another winner chicken dinner for Ashley Poston. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This book follows Emily, who is working to curate an encyclopedia of fairies. We follow her as she goes out on the field and tries to track down and study fae, while also dealing with her academic rival, Wilde. For the most part, I really enjoyed this book. I feel like it had a lot of elements going for it that I really enjoyed. I kind of liked the slower approach to the pacing. Like, that really worked for me, which honestly can sometimes be a hit or miss for me depending on how the pacing is incorporated, but it really fit this story. And I also just like loved the exploration of fae throughout this book. I feel like we got to see so many different types of fae, and the story itself works in these folk tales of the fae, and that aspect was like one of my favorite elements of the story. Like, those were the moments where I was just like so enchanted. I also really loved the dynamic between Wilde and Emily. Their back and forth was so much fun to follow. Emily gets so irritated with Wilde, and Wilde just like loves pushing Emily's buttons and just like enjoys getting on her nerves, and I just loved that dynamic. Honestly, had this book stayed in this like, let's go explore and look at fairies lane, it would have been a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I really enjoyed that element, but it kind of like switches gears and goes down a much more like wild and adventurous lane, and I just didn't love the direction it took. Other than that, for the most part, I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The last book that I read in the month of February is The Wishing Game. In this book, an author who at one point was a mega best-selling author disappears, and now he's back, this time with a competition, and the winner will leave with his latest book that they can then go and sell to a publisher in order to make a profit. I feel like this book was made for me. Almost. It ticked a lot of my boxes. There's like one thing that just didn't work for me, and that was the forced romance. The romance did not need to happen. Like, it still frustrates me thinking about it, but I'm able to overlook it because there were so many other elements that I loved about this book. I loved the competition, which honestly I feel like the competition should have been expanded just a little bit. Still really enjoyed it though. And also it's just like such a delightful story, and there's just so much charm and so much heart, and it just moved me and it hit me, and it's definitely going to be a book that I think about for a long time. Like, it's one of those books where, for me, when I read it, I knew it was going to be one of those books that just like kind of embedded itself into my heart, and I'm here for that. I loved it. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. That is it for my reading wrap up for the month of February. I really enjoyed all the books that I read in the month of February. Again, they might not have all been 5-star reads. In fact, I don't think I had a 5-star read this month. I didn't. That feels weird. Overall, I had a good time in the month of February, and I'm looking forward to all my March reads. I want to hear from you guys down below in the comments. What were some of your favorite books that you read in the month of February? But also, did you have a book in February that just did not work for you? Let me know down below in the comments. If you like this video, be sure to go and hit that like button. If you want to see more bookish content from me, be sure to go and hit subscribe or go and hit that bell icon, and you'll be notified every time I post new videos. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope your day is bright, that tomorrow is brighter. Keep reading what your heart desires, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye-yo! You can definitely still see my back. Oh well. Ah.